Picture this. You're a scrawny farm boy in medieval England, maybe 14 years old, caught stealing bread because your family hasn't eaten in 3 days. The Lord's men drag you before the magistrate, and instead of losing a hand, you're sentenced to something that sounds almost merciful compared to amputation. 6 months in the dungeon beneath the castle. You think you can survive 6 months. You think dungeons are just dark rooms where you wait out your time. You have absolutely no idea what's waiting for you in those stone depths, and by the time you realise the true horror of your situation, it'll be far too late to do anything about it. The reality of medieval dungeons wasn't the romanticised prison cells you see in movies. These weren't places where you quietly served your time while planning a daring escape. They were deliberately designed torture chambers, psychological warfare facilities, and death traps, all rolled into one. The people who built these places understood human suffering in ways that would make modern psychologists weep, and they used that knowledge to create environments so horrific that most prisoners begged for execution within days. Your first clue that something's terribly wrong comes when they drag you down those stone steps. The smell hits you like a physical blow, a mixture of human waste, rotting flesh, stagnant water, and something else you can't identify, but that makes your stomach turn inside out. It's the smell of despair, of bodies slowly decomposing while still alive, of hope dying inch by inch in the darkness. The guards holding your arms are breathing through their mouths, and you realise with growing horror that they're used to this smell. This is routine for them. The temperature drops with every step down. Not just cold, but a bone-deep chill that seems to seep through your skin and settle in your marrow. Medieval dungeons were typically built deep underground, often below the water table, which meant they were perpetually damp and freezing. In winter, the temperature could drop to barely above freezing, and since you're wearing nothing but rough prison clothes, hypothermia becomes a constant threat. Your body will burn through its fat reserves trying to stay warm, and within weeks you'll be skeletal. Then you see your cell, and you realise that everything you thought you knew about imprisonment was wrong. This isn't a room. It's a hole carved into solid rock, maybe 4 feet wide and 6 feet long, with a ceiling so low you can't stand upright. The floor is covered in a layer of straw that's been there for months, soaked with urine and feces from previous occupants. There's no bed, no blanket, no furniture of any kind. Just stone walls weeping with moisture, and that putrid straw that you'll be lying on for the next 6 months. The door isn't made of wood with metal bars like in the movies. It's a solid stone slab that, when rolled into place, cuts off every trace of light and most of the air. You're not just imprisoned, you're buried alive. The darkness is so complete that you lose all sense of time and space. You'll hold your hand inches from your face and see absolutely nothing. Your eyes will strain so hard looking for any trace of light that you'll develop permanent headaches. Food, when it comes, is barely worthy of the name. Once a day, maybe twice if you're lucky, someone slides a bowl of thin gruel through a slot in the door. It's made from whatever scraps the castle kitchen couldn't use, mixed with water that's often contaminated with sewage. The bowl itself is filthy, encrusted with the remnants of previous meals and crawling with insects. You'll be so hungry that you'll eat around the maggots at first. Then eventually, you'll be grateful for the protein they provide. Water is even more precious and dangerous. The drinking water in medieval dungeons was typically drawn from the same sources as the sewage runoff. Dysentery, cholera, and typhoid were common, and once you start experiencing violent diarrhea in a space where you can't properly clean yourself, your situation becomes exponentially worse. You'll be lying in your own waste, unable to move away from it, developing sores and infections that will never heal in those conditions. The psychological torture begins immediately. The complete isolation, the darkness, the constant cold, and the physical discomfort combine to break down your mental defenses faster than you could imagine. Within days, you'll start talking to yourself just to hear a human voice. Within weeks, you'll be having full conversations with imaginary people. The line between reality and hallucination blurs when your brain is starved of sensory input and slowly poisoned by malnutrition. Sleep becomes impossible and essential at the same time. The stone floor is so hard that you can't find a comfortable position, and the cold seeps through your body, making rest elusive. But your exhausted mind desperately needs escape from the horror of your situation. You'll drift in and out of consciousness, never fully asleep, never fully awake, caught in a twilight state where nightmares and reality blend together. The rats are your constant companions, and they're not afraid of you. Medieval dungeon rats were massive, well-fed creatures that had learned to see human prisoners as a food source. They'll start with small nibbles while you sleep, testing to see if you'll fight back. As you grow weaker, they'll become bolder, and eventually they'll start eating you alive. Prisoners were often found with their fingers and toes gnawed down to the bone, still breathing but slowly being consumed. Disease spreads through medieval dungeons like wildfire. With no sanitation, no medical care, and bodies weakened by starvation and exposure, any illness becomes a death sentence. Plague, tuberculosis, and countless other diseases sweep through the prison population regularly. You'll watch fellow prisoners cough up blood, develop massive boils, or simply waste away from fevers that burn through their emaciated bodies. The guards aren't there to help you. They're often criminals themselves, given the job as an alternative to their own punishment. They view prisoners as less than human, and the complete lack of oversight means they can do whatever they want to you. Beatings are common, sexual assault is routine, and torture is entertainment. You have no rights, no recourse, and no hope of justice. Your body will begin shutting down within weeks. The combination of starvation, dehydration, exposure, and disease creates a cascade of organ failure that medieval medicine couldn't even begin to address. Your teeth will fall out from scurvy, your hair will come out in clumps, and your skin will develop open sores that won't heal. You'll watch your body literally consuming itself to stay alive. The worst part isn't the physical suffering, though that's unimaginable. It's the knowledge that this is deliberate. Every aspect of your torment has been carefully designed by people who understood exactly what they were doing to you. The medieval justice system didn't just want to punish crime, it wanted to create such horrific examples that others would never dare break the law. You're not just a prisoner, you're a message written in human suffering. Most prisoners didn't survive their full sentences. The mortality rate in medieval dungeons was close to 90%. And those who did survive were often so physically and mentally broken that they were barely recognizable as human beings. The few who made it out alive carried scars that never healed and trauma that haunted them for the rest of their shortened lives. So when you think about whether you could survive a day in a medieval dungeon, remember that you're not just talking about enduring some discomfort or toughing out a bad situation. Picture this. You're lying on a straw mattress in a stone cell beneath the earth, the air so thick with moisture and decay that every breath feels like drowning. The walls around you are carved from living rock, slick with condensation that never dries, and somewhere in the darkness you can hear the steady drip of water echoing through chambers that stretch deeper than your worst nightmares. Your wrists are raw from iron shackles that have rubbed the skin down to bloody meat, and the chain connecting you to the wall is just long enough to let you stand, but never long enough to reach the door. This is your new home, and if you think you understand what medieval torture was really like from movies and books, you're about to discover that the reality was far worse than anything Hollywood has ever dared to show. Welcome to the world of the medieval dungeon, where human suffering was refined into an art form, and where the very concept of mercy was considered a dangerous weakness. You might think you're tough enough to survive a few days in these conditions, but the truth is that most people who entered these underground chambers were broken within hours, not days. The medieval world had perfected the science of human destruction in ways that would make modern interrogators seem like amateur enthusiasts, and they did it all without the benefit of modern technology or psychological understanding. Before we descend into these forgotten chambers of horror, I want you to understand something crucial. The dungeons I'm about to describe weren't rare exceptions or exaggerated legends. They were standard operating procedure across medieval Europe, documented in legal records, architectural plans, and the testimonies of those few who survived to tell their stories. These weren't the clean, dramatic prison cells you see in films. These were calculated engines of human destruction, designed by people who understood exactly how to break a person's will, body, and spirit in the most efficient way possible. The first thing that would hit you upon entering a medieval dungeon wouldn't be the darkness or the cold, though both would be overwhelming. It would be the smell. Imagine every horrible odour you've ever encountered, then multiply it by 1,000 and trap it in an enclosed space where fresh air never circulates. Human waste accumulated in corners where prisoners had been chained for months or years. The sweet, cloying scent of rotting flesh from bodies that hadn't been removed quickly enough. The metallic tang of dried blood that coated the walls like paint. The acrid smell of infection and disease that hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. And underneath it all, the musty, earthy smell of decay that seemed to seep from the very stones themselves. Your eyes would struggle to adjust to the absolute darkness that defined these spaces. Medieval dungeons weren't built with windows or even adequate torch brackets. Light was considered a luxury that prisoners didn't deserve, and the psychological impact of complete darkness was well understood by medieval jailers. In this blackness, you would lose all sense of time, space, and direction. Minutes would feel like hours, hours like days, and days like an eternity of suffering. The darkness would play tricks on your mind, making you see things that weren't there, hear voices that didn't exist, and feel touches from invisible hands that would make you question your own sanity. The cold would seep into your bones like a living thing, starting at your extremities and working its way toward your core until your entire body was racked with uncontrollable shivering. Medieval dungeons were deliberately built in the lowest parts of castles and fortresses, often below ground level, where the earth's natural moisture would create a perpetual chill that no amount of body heat could overcome. The stones themselves seemed to radiate cold, and the metal shackles around your wrists and ankles would become so frigid that they would burn your skin like brands. Your breath would form clouds in the air, and your teeth would chatter so violently that you'd bite your tongue bloody trying to make it stop. The rats would be your constant companions, and these weren't the small, timid creatures you might imagine. Medieval dungeon rats were massive, bold, and completely unafraid of humans. They had grown fat on the flesh of previous prisoners, and they would see you as nothing more than their next meal. They would start with small exploratory bites while you slept, testing to see if you were still alive enough to fight back. If you were too weak or too injured to resist, they would begin feeding on you while you were still conscious, starting with your fingers and toes and working their way up. The sound of their claws scratching against stone would become the soundtrack of your imprisonment, a constant reminder that you were sharing your space with creatures that viewed you as food. Water would be both your salvation and your torment. The prisoners who managed to collect the moisture that dripped from the ceiling might survive a few days longer than those who couldn't, but this water was contaminated with everything from human waste to decomposing organic matter. Drinking it would cause violent stomach cramps, diarrhea, and vomiting, but not drinking it would mean certain death from dehydration. The water would also create a constant dampness that would make your clothes rot off your body and cause your skin to develop painful sores that would never heal in the unsanitary conditions. Food, when it came at all, would be deliberately designed to prolong your suffering rather than sustain your life. Mouldy bread crawling with insects, spoiled meat that would make you violently ill, and water so contaminated that it was more poison than nourishment. The portions would be carefully calculated to keep you alive but constantly weakening. ensuring that you would never have the strength to attempt escape or resistance. Some prisoners would receive food once a day, others once a week, and some would be forgotten entirely until their screams stopped echoing through the chambers. The psychological torture would begin immediately and never stop. Medieval jailers understood that breaking a person's mind was often more effective than breaking their body, and they had developed techniques that would make modern psychological warfare seem primitive by comparison. You would be kept in complete isolation, cut off from all human contact except for the occasional visit from your tormentors. The silence would be broken only by the sounds of other prisoners being tortured in nearby cells, their screams and pleas for mercy serving as a constant reminder of what awaited you. Sleep would become impossible as your captors employed techniques specifically designed to prevent rest. They would wake you at random intervals with loud noises, sudden lights, or physical violence. The combination of stress, fear, cold, and discomfort would create a state of exhaustion so complete that you would begin to hallucinate and lose touch with reality. Your mind would start to fracture under the constant assault, and you would find yourself talking to people who weren't there, remembering events that never happened, and losing track of basic facts about your own identity. The shackles themselves would become instruments of torture, as they were designed to cause maximum discomfort and injury over time. The iron would be rough and unfinished, with sharp edges that would cut into your flesh with every movement. The weight would be carefully calculated to strain your joints and muscles, causing constant pain that would worsen with each passing hour. Your wrists and ankles would swell around the metal, making the shackles even tighter and more painful. The metal would rust against your skin, causing infections that would spread through your bloodstream and poison your entire system. The stones beneath your feet would be deliberately uneven and covered with sharp fragments that would cut your feet to ribbons if you tried to walk. The walls would be covered with a slime that was part moisture, part mold, and part organic decay that would burn your skin if you leaned against them. Every surface in the dungeon would be designed to cause pain and discomfort, ensuring that there was no position you could assume that would provide even momentary relief from your suffering. Disease would spread through these underground chambers like wildfire, and once you contracted one of the many illnesses that thrived in these conditions, you would have no hope of recovery. Dysentery would cause violent diarrhea that would dehydrate you even faster, while making the already horrific sanitary conditions even worse. Typhus would cause high fevers and delirium that would make you feel like your body was burning from the inside out. Pneumonia would fill your lungs with fluid until every breath became a struggle, and you would slowly drown in your own bodily fluids. The torture devices that filled these chambers would be works of engineering genius devoted to the science of human suffering. The rack would slowly stretch your body until your joints dislocated and your ligaments tore. The Iron Maiden would pierce your flesh with dozens of spikes while keeping you alive long enough to experience every moment of agony. The wheel would break every bone in your body in a predetermined sequence designed to maximize pain while prolonging life. These devices weren't crude instruments of violence, but carefully designed machines operated by skilled technicians who understood exactly how much damage a human body could sustain before death provided merciful release. The psychological impact of simply seeing these devices would be almost as devastating as experiencing them. Medieval torturers understood that the anticipation of pain was often more effective than pain itself, and they would describe in vivid detail exactly what each device would do to your body. They would force you to watch other prisoners being tortured, making you witness the exact fate that awaited you while you counted down the hours until your turn came. The knowledge that you would inevitably experience these same torments would eat away at your sanity like acid, leaving you a gibbering wreck before the actual torture even began. The concept of hygiene didn't exist in these environments, and the accumulation of human waste would create conditions that were toxic to human life. Prisoners would be forced to relieve themselves where they lay, and the waste would accumulate in layers that would become breeding grounds for disease and parasites. The smell would be so overwhelming that it would cause constant nausea and vomiting, which would only add to the accumulation of filth. Your skin would break out in sores and rashes from constant contact with contaminated surfaces, and these wounds would become infected and spread throughout your body. The social dynamics among prisoners would create additional layers of psychological torture, as desperation would drive people to behaviours that would horrify their normal selves. Prisoners would steal food from each other, betray confidences to guards in exchange for small favours, and sometimes even resort to cannibalism when other food sources were exhausted. The bonds of human decency would dissolve under the extreme conditions, leaving you surrounded by people who had been reduced to their most primitive survival instincts. The guards who operated these dungeons would be specially selected for their ability to inflict suffering without experiencing normal human emotions, like empathy or compassion. They would view prisoners as objects rather than people, and they would take genuine pleasure in devising new ways to increase suffering. These weren't reluctant soldiers following orders, but enthusiastic participants in a system designed to break human beings for the entertainment and satisfaction of their superiors. The legal system that created these conditions would offer no hope of rescue or redemption. Medieval justice was based on the assumption that accused persons were guilty until proven innocent, and the methods used to extract confessions would ensure that everyone eventually confessed to something. The torture would continue until you admitted to whatever crimes your captors wanted to hear about, and these confessions would be considered legally valid regardless of the methods used to obtain them. The architecture of these dungeons would be designed to maximize suffering and minimize the possibility of escape. The walls would be too thick to break through, the doors too heavy to force open, and the locks too complex to pick. The chambers would be built in mazes that would confuse anyone trying to navigate them, and the multiple levels would create a vertical labyrinth that would trap escapees, even if they managed to break free from their immediate confinement. The ventilation systems would be deliberately inadequate, creating an atmosphere that was toxic to human life. The air would be thick with carbon dioxide from the breathing of multiple prisoners, methane from decomposing organic matter, and various poisonous gases that would slowly kill anyone forced to breathe them over extended periods. The lack of oxygen would cause constant headaches, dizziness, and difficulty thinking clearly, adding to the psychological torture by making it impossible to plan or reason effectively. The temperature would be carefully controlled to maximize discomfort without causing immediate death. The cold would be severe enough to cause hypothermia and frostbite, but not so extreme that prisoners would die quickly from exposure. The dampness would prevent your body from regulating its temperature naturally, and the combination of cold and moisture would create conditions that would slowly kill you while keeping you conscious and aware of your suffering for as long as possible. The lighting, when it existed at all, would be provided by torches that would create more problems than they solved. The smoke would fill the already toxic air with additional poisonous gases, and the flickering flames would create dancing shadows that would play tricks on your already deteriorating mental state. The torches would be placed just out of reach of prisoners, providing enough light to see your surroundings, but not enough to provide any comfort or warmth. The sounds that filled these chambers would be carefully orchestrated to break down psychological resistance. The constant dripping of water would create a rhythm that would drive you slowly insane. The screams of other prisoners would remind you constantly of your own fate. The scratching of rats would make sleep impossible. The creaking of torture devices would announce the approach of your own torment. And underneath it all, the silence would be so complete that you would begin to hear sounds that didn't exist, voices that weren't there, and music that played only in your fracturing mind. The medieval dungeon wasn't just a place of imprisonment, but a carefully designed machine for destroying human beings in the most efficient way possible. Every aspect of the environment was calculated to cause maximum suffering, while prolonging life long enough to extract whatever information or confession the authorities desired. The people who designed and operated these facilities understood human psychology and physiology better than many modern experts, and they used this knowledge to create conditions that would break any person regardless of their strength, courage, or determination. You might think you're tough enough to survive a day in these conditions, but the truth is that most people would be begging for death within hours of entering these chambers. The medieval world had perfected the art of human destruction, and their dungeons were masterpieces of calculated cruelty that would challenge everything you think you know about human endurance and the limits of suffering.